Good evening, I'm Dr. Laurie Watson and welcome to Rebellious Truth 2021 Karine Polwart. Presented by Celtic and Scottish Studies at the University of Edinburgh in partnership with Edinburgh Tradfest, this is a new event, a performance stroke lecture, and it's designed to foreground the perspective of the artist and an artist in the traditional arts. The traditional arts of music, dance and storytelling have been important to the School of Scottish Studies since its inception in 1951, and this year in 2021 we're celebrating its 70th and the 70th of the archives. This event is part of those celebrations, and I believe we might be being archived as I speak, and please do look out for more events and responses to the archives throughout this 70th year. We are streaming live from St Cecilia's Hall, the first purpose-built concert hall in Scotland. And our first Rebellious Truth speaker is Karine Polwart, folk musician, songwriter, theatre maker, and so much more. Karine's approach to her work goes beyond the ecological and towards what we might term the eco-sensitive. And her contribution to music was acknowledged by the University of Glasgow with an honorary doctorate in 2018. Tonight, we invite Karine to consider traditional arts in relation to wider societal concerns and/or a humanitarian theme. This is not a problem-solving exercise. It's an opportunity to share knowledge, ideas, and questions that arise or emerge through artistic and performance processes. And it certainly feels to me like we've never needed creative thinking more than we do now. To begin our evening, though, we have a debut performance of a composition from School of Scottish Studies Archives traditional artist in residence, Mike Vass. Mike has drawn both sound and images from the archives to include in this new composition, and he's joined by multi-instrumentalist Myrid Green to perform The Order of Time.
This is a poem that I wrote about a girl I was out with one night. And being a young fellow, you know, you don't know that you mean what all the things that you see. Anyway, it's so far back that I can't even mind who it was about. Nae whore I've ever been afore was ever found like this, nor ony other lass I've kent gid me sae warm a kiss. And since ye mak the meanest nuke, a heavenly place to be, could time no stop and leave me as ent for all eternity. But I'd emerge and say will we, as long as we're neath the skies, and though we've love for love to gie the warlord large implies, that should our physical desires defeat our tortured will, there's nothing less than nature's ain, and leave us human still. And the next one's entitled Time, just time. I'll begin now then. Time to me's the minute, a wee and then it's gone. So what I'm caught to gie it, I get it as a wane. And while I'm either all nor no, I need na muckle care, kenning that the present has no a certain air. Say whether this is nicht or day is little sign to me. Eternity's what touches folk, and that assuredly. This time. This time. 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 Then I see the third is a shepherd's philosophy. Who will I ken why I'm doing here, and hae been given a name? The inn my parents chose for me, and still remains the same. But what the registrar wrote down, and ilkebody caused me, has only touched the physical, and never the eternal. But where a mortal gangs at day depends on their belief. Say may we sinners mag our plea, as did the pardoned thief. And should folk name me for a stain, and state my greatest trust, their wrong wha think my spirit's left to crumble in the dust. Me in a consecrated grave, the pauper's undisputed recht, we'll doon among the crumbling lave for days o' yin wi' endless necht. Yon trashy coffin couldna aye resist the siege o' earth and stains. Say 6 months saw the lid gie way, and a' thing dribbling o'er my veins. An antran maggot here and there can almost send a body mad, chowing its way through skin and hair as heedlessly the heartless wad. O consciousness, desert your trust, and brack we all that instant socht, or come ye legions frae the dust, and nullify my every thought. Yet listening when there's naught to hear, and looking while there's less to see, and no gan gate within the year says something for my sanity.
What a gorgeous meditative journey that was, and quite a treat to be standing just over there witnessing it between live physical space and the digital realm. I'm very honoured to be here for the inaugural Rebellious Truth lecture at St Cecilia's Hall. And a wee acknowledgement first before I begin. I was asked to write about what the content of this lecture would be before I had written it. So if you have come into the digital space expecting a lecture about acts of resistance and rebellion by women and some meditation around the issue of domestic abuse and sexual violence, I'm not going to go there tonight, not because I haven't got lots to say about it. I've got so much to say about it. I just haven't managed to find the tone and the heart for it. So I'm going to take a wee sideways step this evening. 21 years ago, I was leading a Monday evening. This is a Monday evening. I was leading a regular Monday evening folk song class at the Adult Learning Project in the west of Edinburgh. And one of the participants in my class was a man called Robbie Nichol, who worked at the time for Scottish Natural Heritage, which is now Nature Scotland's nature agency with responsibility for protecting and promoting biodiversity. And he came to me one evening after class and said, "Karine, I'm organising a wee convention of Swedish ecologists in King, you see. Do you fancy coming and singing for them?" Well, what's not to love about Swedish ecologists in King, you see? Yes, I said, I would. There's one stipulation, says Robbie. You have to be prepared to sing Robert Burns's Now Westland Winds, because I've got quite a lot to say about that. No problem, because Now Westland Winds was and still is one of my all-time favourite songs, not least because of this album, which is pretty much what got me into Scottish folk music in the first place. And if you're looking for a wee gateway into the notion of rebellious truth, you could do far worse than start with the entire canon of Dick Gaughan or this album, Handful of Earth. Anyway, Handful of Earth is quite relevant to what I'm going to talk about this evening. So it comes time to sing Now Westland Winds in King Jussi for the Swedes. And Robbie gets up and he gives this amazing, very brief and extremely lucid appreciation of the song, which completely transforms the way that I understand it. And it really sticks out, even across 20 years, as a wee moment of epiphany, which kind of sent me off, at this point in time, on a slightly different trajectory. Now Westland Winds, says Robbie, is one of the earliest examples in Scottish literature of deep ecological thinking. And what he means by that is it's a way of understanding the natural environment not as something separate from humans, but something that we are embedded and enmeshed in. And of understanding that all the non-human life that surrounds us has intrinsic worth in its own right. It's not just of value because of what we can extract from it, what use it has for humans. And that might seem obvious to lots of you out there, but of course we still talk about the natural world very often in terms of it being a resource that we exploit, and obviously we're completely dependent upon it. But it's a radical way of thinking, deep ecology. So I'm going to sing a little bit of Now Westland Winds for you in a kind of illustrated lecture kind of a way. And I'm going to ask you to listen with very particular ears to the first two verses. I'd ask you to pay attention to what you can hear in the first verse, first of all. And I'd ask you to think about the different ways that humans are depicted in that first verse, how humans inhabit that landscape. And I'd ask you to think about how you feel about that, emotionally and ethically. And then come verse 2, I'm going to ask you just to revel in pre-David Attenborough era, the just beautiful litany of biodiversity that Burns evokes in the second verse of Now Westland Winds. And I'd ask you to pay particular attention to the wood pigeon. If you're not a Scots speaker, that's the cushat. And what happens to the cushat in the second verse. And then we'll be back for some more chat. Now Westland winds and slaughtering guns bring autumn's pleasant weather. The moorcock springs on whirring wings among the blooming heather. Now even grain wide o'er the plain delights the weary farmer, and the moon shines bright as I rove at night to muse upon my charmer. The partridge loves the fruitful fell, and the plover loves the mountain. The woodcock haunts the lonely dell, the soaring heron the fountain. Through lofty groves the cushat roves the path of man to shun it, and the hazel bush o'erhangs the thrush, the spreading thorn the linnet. So that's the first two verses of Now Westland Winds. It was first published under the name Song Composed in August, and that's the time of year that we're in. Burns wrote it, incidentally, when he was a teenager, which kind of blows my mind. If I ever wrote anything half as good as that in my life, I would be absolutely delighted. What we can hear in the first verse, though, we can hear the wind, but we can hear the slaughtering guns, and we know that we're in hunt season. And then we hear the moorcock, the red grouse, starting in the heather, because it's the hunter's prey. And in that first verse, it's very much centred on the activity of the humans in the song. They are not only hunters, there's the farmer, and there's the romantic lover out for a wee walk in the moonlight. But the second verse is a complete flip of perspective. You have the partridge, the plover, the woodcock, the heron, the linnet, and the wood pigeon, the cushat, shunning the path of man. And whether it shuns the path of man because we are irrelevant to the life of a wood pigeon, or because we are a threat to the life of a wood pigeon, we get this completely altered point of view in the second verse of Now Westland Winds. And it's a really beautiful device because it effectively decenters the human perspective in the song. And that's something I'm going to come back to and talk about, because it's something I try to do sometimes in my own writing. I'm going to sing the middle verse of Now Westland Winds. I won't sing the whole song, but this middle verse contains a phrase which is one of the most powerful phrases for me in any folk song, in fact, in any song. So I'll sing it and then say a little bit more about it. Thus every kind their pleasure find, the savage and the tender. Some social join, some leagues combine, some solitary wander. Avaunt away the cruel sway, tyrannic man's dominion, the sportsman's joy and the murdering cry, the fluttering gory pinion. And it's the phrase in the middle of that verse, tyrannic man's dominion, which really gets to me. And this issue of human control and domination and violence in the context of the natural environment is something that Burns returns to in a number of his writings, perhaps most famously in To a Moose. I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union and justifies thy ill opinion which makes thee startle. At me, thy poor earth-born companion and fellow mortal. And it's worth, and it's a song that's often considered cheesy. It's one of the ones that kids learn at primary school, but actually there's a tremendous depth of, I was going to say humanity, but it's not just humanity. There's a depth of ecological thinking and ethics and questions about how we inhabit the earth in that poem. It's a thing of tremendous beauty, I think. And imagine what a difference it would make if, in fact, we as humans viewed all the other forms of life with which we cohabit our planet as fellow mortals or companions. I've had 2 occasions on which to specifically sing that song, and the first of them was in 2011 at the opening of the 4th session of the Scottish Parliament. It's one of the proudest moments of my life to sing in the Parliament building at the royal opening. And I had free rein within the censorship constraints of what you're allowed to take to the Scottish Parliament on a royal occasion to sing what I would like. And I chose Now Westland Winds specifically because of the ecological underpinnings of the song and because there'd been quite a lot of press in the months leading up to that occasion around the game, the shooting industry and how we in Scotland utilise our upland and moorland landscapes. So I was making a very subtle political point by singing it there. I also sing the song in the course of a theatre show which I wrote in 2016 in collaboration with the Royal Lyceum Theatre and the Edinburgh International Festival. And that piece is called Wind Resistance, and it's rooted in the ecology and history and my own personal connections to Fala Moor, which is a tiny little bit of blanket peat bog at the south end of Midlothian, just before you run into the borders. And in the context of wind resistance, Now Westland Wind becomes a meditation on how we as humans commodify our moorland landscapes, both with hunting and shooting, but also with things which might sit more readily with people who think on themselves as green or environmentally conscious. Wind farm developments, for example, are also a way of commodifying our moorland expanses. There's more to say in a wee moment about some of those themes. This idea of litany and biodiversity, it's worth stating that we take quite a lot of pride in Scotland in being a place of grand vistas and wild landscapes, but actually we don't score very highly at all globally in terms of biodiversity indexes. In fact, we're in the bottom 20% of countries in the world in terms of biodiversity, and a lot of that has to do with how we own and manage land and what we try to extract from our natural environment. Robbie Nicol, incidentally, is now Professor of Place-Based Education here at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm sending out a wee thank you to him for what was one moment in time, one night with some lovely Swedish men, mostly men, also women, in Kingussie, Swedish ecologists, but it's really stuck with me across 2 decades as an important little key into understanding folk song and folklore. In 2015, I was asked to participate in a project on the island of Eigg called Songs of Separation. It was conceived and produced by Jenny Hill and brought together 5 Scottish musicians, myself, Mary McMaster, Jen Butterworth, Kate Young and Hannah Reid, and 5 English musicians. Jenny herself, Eliza Carthy, Rowan Reingans, Hazel Askew and Hannah James. And our brief was to respond to the idea of separation and unity, connection and disconnection in any way we wanted to, but through the medium of traditional song. So we arrive in from Malig with all our gear and we head towards the island tea room for a wee cuppa before we head to our digs. And on the exterior wall there is an interpretation board, a sort of potted guide to the wildlife and ecology of Eigg. And I am, as a bird geek, utterly delighted to learn that Eigg is home to the corncrake. I've never met or heard a corncrake at that point. I've still never met or heard a corncrake. And if you've never met or heard a corncrake, I'm going to show you in kind of 1980s children's television style. I kind of missed the PowerPoint revolution as a folk singer. This is a corncrake here. It's quite a wee bird, not much bigger than a blackbird. And you'll see from its colouring that it's quite well adapted to hide itself in long grasses. And that's exactly what it does all year round. It spends the winters in sub-Saharan Africa on the grassy plains and savanna. And then in April, it heads to Northern Europe. And if you can see here, to the coastal fringes of Scotland and Ireland. And between April and September, the corncrake breeds. And it's a small bird, but it's got a tremendous call, which is encapsulated by its Latin name, which is crex, crex, And actually, that's pretty much how a corncrake sounds. Creaks, creaks. You're far more likely to hear than see a corncrake, but you're actually not very likely to encounter one at all unless you're in the Western Isles or the northwest coast of Scotland or the north or west of Ireland. There are fewer than 1,200 calling males across that whole territory now, and they are a red-listed endangered species, largely as a result of 20th century industrial agricultural methods, and in particular, intensive mowing techniques, which have made its ground nests very vulnerable to destruction, much like those of the wee mouse, incidentally, in Robert Burns's Tea Moose. So there I am at the egg tea room, and I'm already Googling and geeking out about corncrake habitats and population numbers. As any folk singer will tell you, Laurie Watson would agree, I'm sure, we carry little folk song jukeboxes around in our heads. So when I read about the corncrake, I'm immediately minded of a song called Echo Mocks the Corncrake. And I wonder to myself, could this be a key into the themes of separation and unity for the Songs of Separation project? I'm going to sing you the song in its entirety because it's very short, and explain a little bit about why it became one of my contributions to that project. It's a pastoral love song. It's not actually about the corncrake at all. But what intrigues me is what's taken for granted in the song. So I'd like you to listen out for where in Scotland the song is set, for what's understood by the singer and the implied listener about the corncrake, and for what the bird symbolises in the song. And pay attention especially to the way in which commerce subtly creeps into the third verse. So this is Echo Mocks the Corncrake. The lass that I loved best of all was handsome, young and fair. With her I spent some happy times along the banks o' Ayr. With her I spent some happy nights o'er yon wee burnie rouse, and the echo mocks the corncrake amongst the whinny knowes. We loved each other dearly, disputes we seldom had. As constant as the pendulum, her heart beat always glad. We sought for love and found it wore yon wee burnie rouse, and the echo mocks the corncrake amongst the whinny knowes. Ye maidens fair and pleasure dames, come frae the banks o' Doon. Ye dearly pay for every cent to the barber for perfume, but rural joy is free for all where the scented clover grows, and the echo mocks the corncrake amongst the whinny knowes. The corncrake is new a woe, the burn is to the brim. The whinny knowes are clad with snow that taps the highest wind. But when cold winter is o'er and summer clears the sky, we'll welcome back the corncrake, the bird of rural joy. So the bird of rural joy. Any song that describes the corncrake in that way could only have been written and meaningfully sung in a place and time when corncrakes were widespread and people were intimately familiar with them. Their seasonal migration, their habitats, their calls. But the corncrake no longer lives in Ayrshire or southwest Scotland at all, where this song is set, although it used to breed there in large numbers. In fact, I read today that in the early 1800s, you could hear corncrakes from Charlotte Square in the city of Edinburgh. Over the past few decades, crofters in particular have worked in partnership with conservationists to support corncrake numbers, changing the way that they harvest, moving to a late summer harvest, and maintaining traditional crofting practices like leaving non-cultivated margins and patches, which support not only corncrakes but other birds and insects. The echo-mox of corncrake is a ghost of another ecological era, a trace of a different kind of human connection to place and to non-human life. But it holds within it also pressing modern issues and concerns, and that's really what's of most interest to me always when I'm thinking about singing traditional folk songs, how something from the past opens up our understanding about the present and about the future, and the possibility and reality of change, whether that's for better or for worse. The phrase that lingers longest with me is "rural joy is free for all, where the scented clover grows." And I wonder, was that ever true? And is it true now? Access to rural joy was never simply free for all, because many of our rural forebears experienced poverty, oppression, famine, forced migration, and disease across many centuries. It's not true now either, and amongst the many things that this past year has shown us is just how unequal and uneven our access is to fresh air and outdoor space, whether that's gardens, allotments in urban parks, or fields, moors, and beaches. And that inequality isn't just about class, wealth, and land ownership, it's about race, gender, and disability too. And it's also true that our rural economies remain tied to the value that we put upon the sportsman's joy and the murdering cry. I'm going to stick with birds for one last point and go back to that gorgeous second verse of Now Westland Winds, the litany of birds. One of my favourite folk song collections, and something I've delved repeatedly into over the past 5 or 6 years, is Carmina Gadelica by Alexander Carmichael. It's a collection of Gaelic hymns and incantations, old lore, as Carmichael describes it himself. And it was collected over 4 decades of fascination and passion and dedication from across the Highlands and the Western Isles. I use the term collection carefully because Carmichael's love of and desire to advocate for the nobility of Gaelic culture caused him to go way beyond simply collecting and documenting the oral culture that he found. He had a middle-class way of tinkering and tidying up in order to improve, as he understood it, and add spiritual and even mystical depth to what he found. But in this respect, he's in good company because James Johnson and Robert Burns' Scots Musical Museum, over a century before Carmichael did his own work, was also an exercise in blurred lines between field collecting, artistic revision, and original songwriting. Carmichael was from the island of Lismore, and like Burns before him, he was an excise man, which is what gave him access to many different areas and many different kinds of people. In Volume 5 of Carmina Gadelica, there's this most gorgeous lullaby fragment, which has a recurring refrain in Gaelic, Ní molenif cachal, my little one shall sleep. And it's a litany of biodiversity featuring 24 birds in their nesting grounds. I'd love to read you a wee snippet of it because it had a big impact on me when I found it. The nest of the raven is in the hawthorn rock. My little one shall sleep, and he shall have the bird. The nest of the plover is in the wooded copse. My little one shall sleep, and he shall have the bird. The nest of the red hen is in the green, red-tipped heather. My little one shall sleep, and he shall have the bird. And my favourite, the nest of the curlew is in the bubbling peat moss. My little one shall sleep, and he shall have the bird. I love this litany. It's utterly beautiful and rich and totally presupposes knowledge and familiarity with place and with non-human forms of life. And I love the way it's a lullaby about a nursing baby and also picturing the birds in their own nesting, nursing state. I weave a fragment of this lullaby into my 2017 album with Pippa Murphy, which is called A Pocket of Wind Resistance. And it's a companion piece to Wind Resistance, which I mentioned earlier. There's a track there called The Moor Speaks, in which I assume the character of Fala Moor. I am earth and I am water, I am sedge and I am sky, I am old, dead things, and I am alive. It's an attempt to write and perform in a way that's both steeped in tradition and folklore, and specifically intended to disrupt a human-centric point of view of nature, one that views the environment as pegged to our needs and desires and demands. There's a litany of moss names in it too: Sphagnum palustre, Sphagnum auriculatum, Sphagnum cuspidatum. To me, the Carmina Gadelica, now Westland Winds, echo mocks the corncrake. In referring to their ecological sensibility, I don't feel like I'm looking backwards with romantic sentimentality. I feel there's a way to view these as resources that are almost like signposts, tools and ways of seeing that might assist us better now and moving forward. So I don't view them as arcane and archaic and dusty. Writing in a non-human voice, as I did with The Moor Speaks, is something I've returned to several times in a piece called I Burn But I Am Not Consumed, which I wrote for the Trump presidency. And I'm also commissioned right now by the Botanic Garden in Edinburgh to write about the imminent demise of the oldest plant in the living collection, which is a sabal palm. And I'm going to write a eulogy for the palm, but possibly in the palm's own voice. I'm going to finish with a song which is directly inspired by Carmina Gadelica and the wider Gaelic tradition of hymns, charms, and incantations. It's from a project called Spell Songs, which is a musical collaboration of 7 musicians: myself, Julie Fowlis, Chris Drever, Rachel Newton, Beth Porter, Jim Molyneux, and Sekou Keita, in response to the amazing work of Robert Macfarlane and Jackie Morris. 2 books, The Lost Words and The Lost Spells, which are about the loss of naming for other forms of life in our natural environment, birds, plants, and animals, and how important it is to name things in order to care about them and live sustainably on this planet. One final thing to say before I offer that song is this is a blessing. It's called The Lost Words Blessing. Folk songs in the folk tradition have work to do. So lullabies are intended to help babies sleep, and laments are intended to grieve, and there are innumerable forms of work songs, and these songs have a purpose, and a blessing is a song that has a purpose too, and it's somewhere between giving thanks and offering humility and wishing good fortune. And that's where the sentiment for this final song comes from. It is foraged from the many spells of Robert Macfarlane and Jackie Morris. And it's called The Lost Words Blessing.
Enter the wild with care, my love, and speak the things you see. Let new names take and root and thrive and grow. Even as you travel far from heather, crag and river, may you, like the little fisher, set the stream alight with glitter. May you enter now as otter, without falter into water. Look to the sky with care, my love, and speak the things you see. Let new names take and root and thrive and grow. Even as you journey on past dying stars exploding, like the gilded one in flight, leave your little gifts of light And in the dead of night, my darling, find a gleaming eye of starling, and like the little aviator, sing your heart to all dark matter. Walk through the world with care, my love, and sing the things you see. Let new names take a root and thrive and grow. And even as you stumble through macher sands eroding, let the fern unfurl your grieving, let the heron still your breathing, let the selkie swim you deeper. Oh, my little silver seeker, even as the hour grows bleaker, be the singer and the speaker, and in city and in forest, let the lark become your chorus. And when every hope is gone, let the raven call you home.
Hello. Hello, Laurie Watson.
Thank you so much, Karine. Thank you for those very insightful reflections on your work and the world around you. And as long as I've known you, you're someone who has always drawn such beautiful threads together, finding connections that I don't see. It's really inspiring. So thank you so much. In fact, I remember perhaps maybe 15 years ago or more, you had a mantra at the time, and it was, "There will be no generic birds."
Oh, did I really say that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And I thought, imagine being able to name every bird I saw. But thank you so much to everyone who sent a question in for Karine. We do have time for one or two just now, but we will pass on the rest to Karine as well, just so that you have
Grand,
them and
thank
seen
you.
them. So we'll begin with something in connection with your work, and like we heard with Mike, you quite often incorporate sounds in your compositions, theatre work, and I'm wondering, the sound recordings that you use are field recordings, Atmos recordings from the environment.
Mm-hmm.
How do they help you to write music about non-human species and entities?
That's an interesting question. Mostly when I'm incorporating sounds, I'm working with my friend and colleague Pippa Murphy, who's a sound designer. So a lot of those sounds are actually gathered by her. She's got the gear, and she's got the ears, and she's got the skills to know how to capture the sounds well. So I've really enjoyed capturing sounds with Pippa and working really closely with her in building little worlds, little sound worlds. The truth is, I'm really privileged because of where I live, that in some respects I can actually inhabit the landscapes that I want to write about. So to be honest, I would much rather go and lie on Fallamure, which is what I did quite often when I was making Wind Resistance, as I would just head up there and hear the songs in real time and space. And that definitely did inform the way that I wrote, for sure, because I noticed things. When you pay attention in a kind of slow way, you notice things. And for the most part, I think I want to write about environments that I can inhabit rather than about environments that are elsewhere. But I can totally imagine that if I did want to do that, I would love to swim, and anything visceral to me is helpful when it comes to conjuring ideas in music.
So in the actual composition, it's far beyond the sound of things, it's experiential.
Yeah, definitely.
And then when you're putting together a piece or a show, when you're sitting there listening and editing and working with the sound, do things change? Do they shift before we see and hear them?
Oh, yeah, like in geekish, like, spotty detail. Yeah, they shift hugely. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're going to incorporate sound into your work, and I'm a novice at it, Pippa's an expert at it, you have to view it as another instrumental texture. So sound can be really badly used. You know, there's a thing right now about using sound, but it has to be used as if it has equal weight to any instrumental texture or vocal texture that you would add, and not just like chucked in to the mix. It's got its own ebb and flow, and there's a lot you can bounce off from that, if you know what I mean. And you need to pay attention to it. It's not just, if you want it to be, you want to feel situated, it's got to have its own space. Yeah.
Thank you. And one more, you touched on the depth of understanding that we have already in songs and poems that are quite deeply embedded in all of our lives, but perhaps are greatly overlooked.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, the meanings and the layers of meaning that are in those songs. How do you think that we could best draw out that knowledge from these songs and poems that are all around us? And do you think that they can really make a difference given the urgency of things?
I think they can make a difference because I think music has we have ways of responding to music that are unlike the ways that we respond to other things, as in it's literally physically happening to your body. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's important. You talked about sound, but music affects the cells of our body and evokes an emotional response. And I think what we need above all else to get us out of our kind of cultural stupor is an emotional response. I think we're actually having an emotional response right now, and it's one of shutdown in many quarters. So anything that is that offers a little kind of chink in the armor is useful. So music is just one of those things. I mean, it's why, for example, the huge cinematic documentaries of the natural world often have a really profound effect. Although what they're saying is being said for decades, they make a difference because we respond to them as visceral bodies in space. So I think it can make a difference, and it can be incorporated into education, but not only for children. And that's one of the great things about the Lost Words Spell Songs project, is that it's not just a project for children, it's a project for all of us. Children only lose connection with the natural environment because their parents and grandparents and communities lose that connection. So there's a job for people of my age, and I think it's experiential and it's emotional as much as it is scientific or political.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Karine.
Thank you.
We'll have to wrap up here. A few thank yous before we go. Our partners and funders, Creative Scotland and William Grant Foundation, Celtic and Scottish Studies at the University of Edinburgh and St Cecilia's Hall. To the brilliant crew behind our live stream tonight, Craig Gaskin on sound mix, Ian Forsyth on vision mix, and Sandy Butler on camera and direction. Thanks to our artists, of course, our guest speaker for Rebellious Truth 2021, Karine Polwart, as well as Mike Vass and Myred Green. And a few thanks on their behalf. From Karine, thanks to Professor Robbie Nichol, Jenny Hill, and Lost Words Spell Songs. From Mike, thanks to Steve Byrne, and to Louise Scully and Dr. Kathleen Macaulay at the School of Scottish Studies Archives for their assistance. A special thank you and congratulations to Edinburgh Tradfest on their first digital festival, and the podcasts will be available for a full year, although our live stream is about to end. And a special thank you to the absolute powerhouse that are Jane Ann Purdy and Douglas Robertson, particularly for all that you do for musicians and for live music. It is very, very much appreciated. And finally, thanks to you all, of course, for joining us tonight. I hope that you'll join us next year, hopefully in person and perhaps with beer and even hugs. And until then, all best wishes and good night.